Da me guidata la vittoria, il plauso dimenticata, te mia dolce Aida, tornar di Lauricinto, dirti per te ho pugnato, per te ho vinto.
Okay, hi everyone. Sorry, I thought I was streaming there for quite a while, and I didn't realize that I was not, in fact, streaming. So, let's get on with this. Today, we're going to be looking at Zhea from TransVoiceLessons.com. Or not .com. I don't know if it's a .com. But anyway, that's her YouTube channel. I'll put the link in the video description later. Let's get on with this.
Very specific reason. It's because it is more actionable and easier for individuals
so this
to
is the
do.
spot where I wanted to start.
That is how you navigate your body and your actions, through your direct experience. You cannot directly experience biomechanical reality. Trying to learn voice control through understanding biomechanics is a lot like trying to learn how to dance by studying your bones, your muscles, and your tendons.
All right, so hi and welcome back to Mr. Opera and the New School Singer. Sorry again for the delay. I know I would be starting about 25 minutes ago, and as far as I knew, I had started. But this being my second live stream, I didn't realize that when you schedule, you still have to hit the go live button. Anyway, so here we are, and today we're looking at Zhea. And this is a user, not a user request, it's a viewer request, to look at this video about vocal terminology. But then I wound up looking into her channel because I was actually really impressed when I started watching the video. And I got a little bit of a feel for what she's about, and I thought it was actually really cool. So I thought, why don't we do a bullshit inspector? Because it would be nice not to get such a high bullshit score for episode number 2. So here we are, and welcome. And before we get started, yes, I realize this is kind of crazy for a cisgender guy with whose girlfriend doesn't like his beard, and who sings operatic tenor roles, and who has no experience with voice feminization, which is the main topic of her YouTube channel. But what she's doing is really based in the same stuff that I'm interested in, and that I talk about, and so that is my wheelhouse. And so here we are, as per a viewer request, for episode number 2 of the Bullshit Inspector. So let's get started. I'm gonna let Zhea introduce herself. And then we're just going to go point by point and score this thing. Get out of the way a little bit.
Hi there, it's your girl Z from TransVoiceLessons.com. And today we're going to talk about why voice terms suck so bad. Why are there so many terms? Why is there so much fancy language? It's all so confusing. Well, today we're going to make sense of all that and more. Terms really do matter, and I promise that if you listen and watch this, you will walk away being able to navigate all.
I think there's a big point of agreement, like right off the bat here. I very much agree with her that terms do matter. I don't know what else you can say about that. That's where new school singing kind of came from in the first place. So I guess I do know what I could say about that. New school singing is based on the idea, as a starting point, that the voice is not an instrument. Most people who talk about singing or about anything to do with the voice, I don't know about most people, but many people who talk about singing or anything to do with the voice refer to the voice as an instrument, and they make the point that you can treat it as an instrument and then learn all the parts. But new school singing starts with the assumption that it's not an instrument, and then, okay, now what? So, yeah, really big agreement with her on this first point that she's making right off the bat.
All the resources on this channel and other channels.
Also, I'm assuming that's her handwriting, and I very much like her handwriting. As someone who's kind of handwriting impaired, I really appreciate that.
Much easier. So let's get started. Imagine every element that we talk about in voice is like a hydra. It has a main body, but there's multiple faces to it.
Oh, well, now she's really making me happy, because that's essentially summing up the way new school singing is also structured. You'll see me presenting basically 3 heads, actually. And I show for instance, fitness, heart, and knowledge. And those are basically different ways of understanding stuff that you do, decisions that you make, or etc., etc. So very much I like this.
We will call these different faces.
There's nothing really to I guess agree with or disagree with so far. Just some really good points. Okay. Let's see.
Faces, lenses, or frames, because they give us something to look through. We're going to talk about 3 different lenses. The sensory experience, the acoustic description, and the biomechanical process.
So I can't find any of this kind of true or false. These are, in my opinion, which lenses you use isn't so important. The fact that she's using 3 is really what appeals to me. Having 3 lenses to look through when you're thinking of a problem, especially something like singing, which could be, shall we say, holistic, then just from the fact that you're changing your perspective between more than 2 different things is going to sort of alter your thought processes in general, in my humble opinion. So I like this.
All of these are slightly different.
But as far as bullshit inspector goes, there's nothing how can I say that's true or not true? You know?
The sensory description refers to our direct experience, what it sounds like. The acoustic description describes what happens.
She said the sensory description is the subjective experience. Okay. All right.
When we measure it, what do we get objectively happening in the signal? And then the biomechanical process describes what physically has to happen in order for this acoustic signal to be generated in order for us to experience the thing.
Okay. Yeah. I mean. Okay. I'm gonna give it a true. Let's give her one more true, because just the beginning, where she said the stuff that matters to her. It's not that I think it's necessarily true and other things that someone could do are not true. It was just really great, and I don't have a really great button here. So let's give it a true. It's a subjective scale. It's my sensory experience. Okay. So one thing I'll say though is that the biomechanical and the acoustic have this, shall we say, mesh point, or this overlap, but the amount of overlap is not constant. So depending on the way that you're using your voice, how separate acoustics and biomechanics are is going to change. We're kind of capable of more linear voice production and non-linear voice production. So these category, but that's not a big deal. That two categories would overlap like that. And then between the sensory and acoustic, you also have this psychoacoustics, I guess. So that her lenses are a bit overlapping, but I don't see how that's. I mean, it's fine. I use like 8 sets of lenses. If one set of lenses isn't great for the moment, you can switch lenses in the set, or you can just totally change sets of lenses. So it's not a big deal.
These are not equal. The sensory experience is your individual experience. The acoustic description is kind of what it is in a signal sense, and the biomechanical is more of a how it works. And what we'll find is that the most direct but the most subjective is the sensory experience. In the middle, we have the acoustic, and the most objective but the most abstract is the biomechanical description.
Okay.
Let's do a basic example.
Wait. I'm gonna have to put an untrue here, because acoustic and biomechanical are both objective. One is not more objective than the other. Objective doesn't work with you can't. There's not like levels of objective. Something's objective or it's subjective. I guess if you have a group of things and some of them are subjective and some of them are objective, then if you're talking about this group, it could be slightly more subjective or objective. But acoustics and biomechanics are both the province of objective. So I'm understanding that what she considers sensory is going to be subjective, but this is it's a bit sketchy, I guess, as far as if it's true. But as far as like a tool for voice training, then I don't think you have to have the standard so high. So, but anyway, just making that point. So
talk about pitch, right? Everyone knows what pitch is, right? Well, you might be surprised. So most people tend to think that pitch is frequency, right? I ask so many people this question. Everyone answers it this way because it makes sense, right? Well, this is the problem. They are not the same thing. They do not mean the same thing.
Yep, that's true. Pitch and frequency are not the same thing. So, just agree with her on that. Let's see.
Pitch is a sensory experience that humans have. Pitch is subjective. Pitch is the sensory experience of high and low. That's it. If something sounds higher or lower, the pitch is different.
Okay, well... Okay, so there's different uses of the word pitch. So I'm just going to have to assume this is true because she's saying it in the context of what she does, which is helping people feminize their voices who are transitioning or have transitioned or whatever. For whatever reason, people who want to feminize their voices will consult her as an expert. And she seems to be good at it. So I guess in the context of just speaking, then pitch is kind of higher and lower. But you can, in the context that I know, and also in the context of like speech pathology, for instance, pitch can be measured. So the pitch of a voice can be measured. And the label that you would give to the pitch is based on frequency. It's the frequency of the lowest frequency that's, shall we say, in the sound when you have all the frequencies present. So let's say that you have the pitch is 220. It's A3. Then your next one up is 440, and then you keep going up the harmonic series. We call that pitch 220, and people will hear 220 when you play that. However, if you play that 220 pitch, but you're sneaky, and you somehow pull away the fundamental frequency, so 220 isn't actually there. You're starting at 440, but then everything else is the same as if we had played 440 and we had the 220, sorry, and then we had the rest of the harmonic series going from 220. Then we can predict that people will hear the pitch that we call 220, that we call A3, rather. And in the most common tuning system, that's A3 is 220 hertz. It's measurable. And if you don't have a measurement of the fundamental, then you could look at the rest of the frequencies, and then you could determine what the fundamental would have been. So actually a computer can measure that anyway. So I don't know that. I mean, I'm a little bit, I don't know, I'm not a philosopher. So, but I think there's maybe philosophy issues here. But I can see how in the context of voice feminization, that's not for singing, maybe pitch is just higher or lower. So, yeah, anyway.
Now, frequency is the acoustic parallel. You might be thinking, well, Z, does this really matter? I mean, is there actually a difference? And at first, these differences may seem trivial, but there are all sorts of situations where I could organize frequencies in such a way to make you hear pitches which cannot be measured. Pitch and frequency are...
Okay. So, yeah, like I was just telling you about the missing fundamental illusion. But you can measure shall we say, if you can measure what's there, then you can work out that the pitch is what it is. It's not just subjective. It's just that although we define pitches by their fundamental, it's actually more than the fundamental. And if you have enough of that in place, you have that pitch. But I don't, yeah. And that is still defined by frequency once you have a tuning system that assigns frequencies to specific pitches. And then if you had a pitch range, you could still assign a frequency range to being high and then a different frequency range to being low. But I get her point that it's as far as the speaking voice, and then also what people mean by high and low, that's a whole different thing.
Different descriptions. They exist to different lenses of experience. And when we talk about frequency, we have now removed it.
What's the biomechanical experience of hearing someone? Or I guess it's just voice production. But she's referring to hearing as with acoustics. So that's a little bit inconsistent for me, but again, it would be nitpicking because the point is to have these lenses to switch to as far as I can see at this time. Yeah.
One level of experience. Let's work backwards and understand why this matters. So if we're thinking about what pitch is on a biomechanical level, oh my God, it's so complex. It is so insanely complex. There's tension, there's mass, there's airflow.
I don't know what to put here. Untrue or... I don't know. I'm almost edging to the bullshit thing because I'm not sure there's a biomechanical explanation of or experience of pitch. I think pitch is already this. If you're talking about a pitch, it's already traveling. There's no, it's radiated sound already. You've resonated it. I mean, you can imagine a pitch, I guess, but yeah. Anyway, so I don't know here. I don't know what to put. I feel like if I make mistakes here, the stakes are higher than last time. Just because I could get canceled or whatever. I don't think I'm going to get canceled. Nobody cares, but okay.
So there's all these little factors which ultimately influence vocal fold oscillation rate, which ultimately produces all these harmonics. And
yes, just saying, another way to say vocal fold oscillation rate is frequency. Just saying.
And the lowest one is perceived as a fundamental frequency, which ultimately is just high or low. By thinking in sensory terms, we make it less complex. We don't need to talk about this or this. We need to talk about this.
Okay, here... yesterday I was reading... I don't know what to put here. I don't think it's true. I think this is a little bit like... now that it's really hot out and it's summer, you make a video that says shorts are the only good pants. From now on, I'm only going to wear shorts, and all anybody needs to wear is shorts, because shorts are the only good pants. Like, long pants are too hot, and it's hot out, so shorts are the only good pants. But I think it's a lot wiser to hang on to your regular pants for if the winter comes back around. Maybe not in her practice. Maybe, I don't know. For me, I plan to switch between my different lenses, not too often, but also not to get stuck in just one way of looking at things for too long. Because it tends to lead to going in circles, you know? And then if you look at the circles in the right perspective, it's like you're in a downward spiral, actually. So I try to, yeah.
And that's one of the issues, and a very deliberate, intentional move away from my old content. If you go back, my earliest videos in 2017, 2016, we're talking about this stuff.
So to me, this is in essence describing the process of spring going into summer, and you make your transition to pants. And then all I would say is don't be surprised if the winter comes back around and fall comes around before that. But on the other hand, she's demonstrating this process of running through these different lenses, and then you can see that she got a good result. So I would say to someone who's considering, for instance, using her as a consultant, imitate what she does. Find out as much as you can about what she does. And yes, do consider the things she thinks she does, because that's also going to be really helpful. But don't leave out, so if she demonstrates that starting with the biomechanical understanding and then trying to work through some acoustic understanding and some sensory understanding might lead to some kind of state or phase in which you can start to mostly use your sensory understanding to bring about some kind of biomechanical and acoustic reality. But I would say that that's going to be dependent on your capacity. Yeah. And if you've got a problem that's in the biomechanical department, you're going to be like someone who's in the winter and they only have shorts in their wardrobe. You need pants as well, because winter's coming. That's all I'm saying.
Right? And then in around 2019, I'm really talking a lot about this stuff. And by 2020, I'm almost exclusively talking to beginners about this stuff. And there is a very specific reason. It's because it is more actionable and easier for individuals to do. That is...
Okay. Well, I mean... True? I mean, I have to imagine that someone who's coming to, someone who's coming for voice feminization lessons is gonna get the biggest benefit, especially as a beginner, and especially as far as lessons are concerned, from just doing things that they can already do. And as far as like biomechanically and acoustically, working with what they've got, because they're talking about presenting a particular speaking voice. So it's not like learning opera or something where like well, who gives a shit if nobody can understand what you're saying? Like, oh, big news, we can't understand what someone is saying at the opera. Nobody can understand. It's like, I don't think anybody understood a soprano since like 1700 or 1600 or ever. It's, yeah. But when it comes to your speaking voice, like, people have to understand you. And it's going to be almost necessarily based on things that are within your easy range of motion. So it makes a whole lot of sense, I think, for her to be focused on this. But then I would say as well, the biomechanical and the acoustic can seem like they take care of themselves until they don't. And that often when you look into someone's actual experience who claims that the physical side of things is not so important, you look into their experience and then you look into their capabilities and you find that it's not important, not because it isn't important, but because they've always had it or they have it now, and they discount how they got that. They just have a bias in their memories about what was important, and it's not surprising if the things that seem important are like stuff the brain did, because the brain is the one that's deciding what's important. So I don't know, if you ask me, it always tries to make itself look like the most important thing in the room, but it could be your stomach for all you know.
Is how you navigate your body and your actions through your direct experience. You cannot directly experience biomechanical reality. Trying to learn voice control.
It's true. You have... Okay, I'm going to say she gets one, like a true and a false at the same time. You cannot directly experience biomechanical reality. That's true. But you can do things, for instance, like train, get some kind of outside source of information about, shall we say, your biomechanical reality, and actually develop your ability to sense what is going on. So you can change how biomechanical reality, shall we say, lines up with your interoception or proprioception, or anyway, your sense of where you are and what you're doing, where your body parts are, etc., etc. Your sensations when it comes to the vocal tract. Like after 20 years, there's certain elements of my vocal tract from just being a professional singer and like constantly thinking about my vocal tract and trying to get it to do some pretty particular things. I have sensations now that I wouldn't really recognize 20 years ago, that I wouldn't know what to do with. And as far as I know, that's actually changes in the brain where you make more connections between things. So I think that it's true on the one hand that you can't experience biomechanical reality directly, but you can collect information about biomechanical reality and use that to correct your sensory experience, as she puts it. Your subjective experience.
Through understanding biomechanics is a lot like trying to learn how to dance by studying your bones, your muscles, and your tendons. That's not what allows you to dance.
It's not what allows you to dance. It is, though, what allows you to come up with a good stretch, shall we say. It's what allows you to come up with, let's say that you have like a biomechanical impediment between you and the dance. Let's say you need to be faster, stronger, whatever, more flexible. And you need that in a very specific way for that dance. Understanding biomechanics or being close to someone who does is going to be pretty invaluable. because it's through understanding biomechanics that you're going to be able to come up with the ideal that you're actually after, which you then can compare to what it is that you're doing, possibly by getting some kind of data from the outside. Like, I don't know, you set up a camera and you videotape yourself, or you whatever it is that you're doing to get information that can be used to update your experience. And that's how you set up exercises for yourself. So if at all you're interested in being an autodidact, someone who's studying, who directs their own study, and I think that's a huge majority of people who wind up getting on YouTube to find out about singing techniques. Well, if that's you, then I don't think you're in this category of people who can skip biomechanics or acoustics.
Experience and action is how you learn to dance. So here's a breakdown of some pretty important vocal components and how they will use different language depending if we're talking about the sensation of it, the acoustics underlying it, or the biomechanics which give way to this process. So let's use pitch as an example. We're talking about the sensory experience of high and low, and that corresponds mostly to the fundamental frequency that we could measure, which corresponds to this really complex biomechanical process of vocal fold oscillation rate.
Okay,
when we think about the sensory experience of weight, vocal weight perception, we are talking about the relative saturation in the sound. Is it heavy? Is it dense? Is it light and not so dense? And that corresponds to an acoustic feature called spectral roll-off, which is...
Oh, spectral roll-off. Okay. I don't know what that is. I don't know what spectral roll-off is, I have to admit. I would assume that it's, if you have a wave coming, it's how quickly, or how much of that wave is like away from the energetic part. So if you have a curve, this is what I don't know what spectral roll-off is, but I can tell you that there's a whole lot. Okay, I can tell you first of all, when it comes to the sensory experience part, I should have stopped there, because subjectively, I guess I might use a word like saturation. I don't know. But after looking into the terminology that complete vocal technique teaches for filling in, I suppose, this part of her lens, I was very impressed, and their terminology is very clear. And although they are things you can hear, and they are things that their coaches that they train can learn to differentiate well enough to be passing exams where everyone needs to get the same answer. They don't use these terms like saturation. Like, okay, I understand saturation, maybe some kind of distortion and stuff. They have, I suppose, for weight, you could say, they have this density concept. They have this concept of metal, and you can hear metal, you can learn to hear what it is, and get acquainted with that and pretty quickly understand how that works. And that again has an acoustic component that can be measured. It has an acoustic parallel. You can measure that. And then there's also how long the vocal folds are spending in contact. that's something you can hear. That's the contact quotient. So we can say that there's this contact quotient you can hear, there's this skewing quotient that you can hear, which is how I suppose this is related to this spectral roll-off, because when you have a skewed curve, instead of smoothly going from closed to open and all at the same rate, you could think about like one side is pushed over. So it kind of takes a while to get to the open part. We could say that that's the weak part. And then it very quickly gets close to the closed part. So we could say like the strong part. And it's not just that it's in contact longer, it's like spending much longer time in the zone where it's closer together, where the folds are closer together. Then you also have how much contact is there. And then you also have how thick the vocal folds are, relatively speaking. So if they could do that thicker, if they could have more density, then you say, oh, it's reduced density. But if that's already full, they call that fuller density, shall we say. And then they have one vocal mode where you can only have reduced density. But they have these things much more specifically fleshed out, I guess you could say. And then they also show that they have acoustic parallels. And I don't hear any mention of this roll-off. Could be that there's this spectral roll-off. I'm not familiar with it. Would have to look up what that is and how it relates to the voice. But I would say that instead you have, yeah, anyway. Let's go on here.
It's really cool. I've talked about this in some videos already. And we can think that this is roughly a biomechanical proxy around vocal fold mass. So
I guess so. I mean,
if you pay attention, I made that video, vocal fold mass, in like 2020, and that was right before I switched.
I'll have to look that one up. Sorry guys, I just don't know what spectral roll-off is. You can see if anything comes up on a quick search here. Spectral roll-off. So I got spectral roll-off is the frequency below which a specified percentage of the total spectral energy, e.g. 85%, lies. And there's nothing further about that. So I'm not sure how that's applying, except maybe that's got to do with the skewing quotient. Yeah. And those have to do with spectral moments, apparently. So it's interesting stuff. I'm sorry that I'm not more knowledgeable here about spectral roll-off.
All my language over to the sensory experience. And so now when I'm talking about, vocal fold mass, I'm really just talking about perceptual weight, because that's a more direct way to think about it.
So... yeah, that is a more direct way to think. I don't know what to put here on my scoring. It is a more direct way to think about it. And I just have to trust that in her domain, that's the way to go. But in my domain, if, for instance, I'm stuck in reduced density, then it's not going to work to just try to perceptually add more weight, because I already know that in that particular situation, you're in a mode that's going to, or often I am in a vocal mode that's going to make a lot less sound, even though, and as I add more or attempt to add more weight, it's going to make even less. But it's a very different situation, I think, from anything that she's claiming to be dealing with. So I mean, great stuff so far.
Now, resonance is a little interesting. I want to work backwards on this one. So, for instance, if you're describing resonance as how big or small the vocal tract is, that's a biomechanical description.
Okay, but I'm not. Yeah, I'm not sure where that's coming from, how big or large the vocal tract is. As you know, I think it might be coming from this Helmholtz resonance model of the vocal tract. But as you know, if you watch my tutorials on resonance, not residence, resonance, I don't think it has to do with the volume of the vocal tract. When we say, I mean, if we're talking about size, the important dimensions are going to be the overall length, and in my system that's called area of interest number 1. And then you have to think about the amount of expansion or narrowing that happens in relation to particular areas. And for the first 2 formants, that's going to be 4 areas. The end of the mouth, and then wherever the beginning of the vocal tract happens to be. So if the larynx, wherever it is, starting there, measuring to the end of the vocal tract, that's area of interest number 1. The end of the vocal tract, the end of the vocal tract is area of interest number 2, where the beginning was number 3, and then the rest of the vocal tract is divided into 3 parts, basically, and you have points at those divisions. And depending on whether they are displacement nodes or antinodes, you get the opposite effect from expansion or constriction in those areas. So I don't think you get size, yes, as in the overall length, for instance. But the vocal tract does not work in the way that's taught on, for instance, voicescienceworks.org and other such rather pseudo-scientific websites claiming to teach the resonance, how resonance works in the singing voice. Anyway.
That's far removed from the actual useful experience that you'll have to control resonance. As we make that chamber bigger and smaller, we drive resonant frequencies around, and now we're talking about the acoustic description. And then as those resonant frequencies are driven around, we tend to hear the thing as sounding even large.
Okay. What she just did was, and to me, but maybe it's because I know what it is, but it didn't sound larger to me, it sounded longer. Her vocal tract. It didn't just sound longer, it sounded like it got longer by means of the thyroid cartilage being pulled down harder than the hyoid bone is being pulled down. And the hyoid bone could have in fact been experiencing some kind of net upward tension, so that the little gap between the thyroid and the hyoid gets really wide. And I guess you could say that's more volume overall, and it's a longer vocal tract. But what you're hearing is lengthening and source changes. Some of them that are predicted by the fact that she's pulling the thyroid and the hyoid apart like that. And then the other major change is that doing so relaxes the constriction around what I call area of interest number 3, which is just the beginning of the vocal tract. And she demonstrates in another video of hers that I saw that actually she's good at manipulating this area to make what she calls a rough sound, which I would call metallic, which also is measurable and acoustic, but I don't think it's spectral roll-off. And it's also not necessarily more vocal weight. So this metallic element can both perceptually and also with measurements, they can be distinguished.
Or even sounding smaller, which is perceptual size. So if I say, so this sound is larger, that sound was larger than this sound.
So this sound was larger, and then that sound was larger than this sound. Yeah. So, interesting. I don't know how close I'm getting here. Those are sounds that would go with people whose starting dimensions are like bigger and smaller. So men tend to have these longer vocal tracts than women, and also bigger overall because men tend to be bigger overall. But again, I would caution that the way the acoustics works isn't that whenever you make the vocal tract quote unquote bigger, you make it sound quote unquote bigger or deeper. It's about the total length, especially. You could have a rather long and slender vocal tract and still achieve a pretty deep sounding thing. And if you looked at her vocal tract on let's say if you made a 3D imprint of the inside of her vocal tract and you 3D printed that and you looked at it, it would probably be a whole lot more narrow than you're expecting. Anyway.
The resonance is ultimately what's changing there, yes, but we hear it as the effect of perceptual size. This is so important. Perceptual size is what we are trying to change when we deal with feminizing or masculinizing our resonance. And it is a much more direct way to understand it than thinking about it as resonance by itself or vocal tract size by itself. And that is why the sensory experience is, yes, it's the most subjective, but it's also the most actionable. And as we move away from that...
So although it's subjective, there's a lot of things that you can sense that are objectively verifiable. So you could verify it objectively. So if you sense that the sound, for instance, is metallic, and you need to be absolutely sure because you don't trust your senses for some reason, you could measure and confirm whether or not it's metallic, as long as you've defined beforehand what that's going to be looking like on the graphs that you're going to be looking at. When it comes to the sense of somebody's size, which I guess she equates with big with masculine and small with feminine. I'm not sure that I do. But if that's the frame that she's working from, I think that makes perfect sense. This is a really hard one to score. And no bullshits, by the way, so far. I don't think she's bullshitting anybody. So, also have to nitpick that, again, sensory, acoustic, biomechanical, this objective, subjective distinction and then hierarchy, I'm not sure really has any like internal consistency. I'm not sure it's logical. Anyway.
Things become increasingly more abstract and increasingly harder to directly apply in.
So yeah, again, biomechanical and acoustic are not more abstract than sensory. By the time you're describing your sensory experience, it's abstract. What's going on biomechanically is not necessarily an abstraction. I mean, that's what's going on. That's, yeah, describing it maybe is making abstractions, but you're describing something that's going on objectively.
Your vocal journey. Think of it like color.
And I guess, so I should say, yeah, I guess in biomechanics, you're putting a theory on how things are working. So I guess, yeah, it's abstraction.
When you're talking about your favorite color, or when you are playing with colors in art, you're not thinking about the wavelengths of light. You're simply...
Look, I often hear this kind of thing, and I guess she's not an artist. Or I guess she's not an artist who thinks about wavelengths when they think about light. Or who thinks about color in really specific ways like that. But someone who's a colorist, for instance, on movies, who makes their living working with color correction, color grading, and just working with color. They're very interested in color science. And maybe some are more intuitive than others, and some use more color science than others. But I caution against this. Again, back to the shorts and pants analogy. Just because it's summer for you and it's the time to wear shorts doesn't mean that shorts are the only way to go. It just means it's summer. And if you're wearing shorts in the summer because it's hot and you're more comfortable, that's really smart. It's not smart if winter rolls around and you're still wearing your shorts and you're uncomfortable and you're refusing to admit that you made a mistake 6 months ago. Yeah. I'm not saying that that's what she's doing, but
guiding yourself based off the experience you have of seeing color. And this is what we mean when we say there are multiple descriptions for a similar thing. So for instance, color would be the sensory experience you have when you see color. The wavelength of light would be the optical measurement of maybe what generates that color. Now, the other description lens is the mechanical lens. So in this case, it would be like you have rods and cones inside your eye, and when they take wavelengths of light optically, they then create this crazy process, which then gives us an experience. So there is the experience.
I don't see... There's nothing to take issue with here, and this is like really great point that she's making. In new school singing, I guess you could say this is analogous, if we want to draw a parallel, to attitude. So I talk about position, motion, and attitude when I'm talking about the execution of a particular technique. And I'm not saying that that's my lenses are better than her lenses. It's a different kit of lenses and it serves a different purpose. And I have my kits of lenses, shall we say, that I like to use, and those are based on the jobs that I do. And likewise, her lenses are based on the jobs that she does. So that makes a lot of sense. That's back to the shorts analogy. You wear the shorts for the weather today. But when I talk about attitude, I'm talking about this subjective experience of how how you do something. It goes like this. So the dance example is a good example. By the time you're actually able to execute a dance, you're not thinking about where to put your feet. It kind of just happens. The feeling of doing the dance in that way, you can communicate to someone by telling them the name of the dance. And then if they know that same dance, they have a good idea of your sensory experience even. But if someone else doesn't know that dance, they don't understand that. They only understand it from the outside. And your name for that dance, so if you say the Charleston, it doesn't evoke the attitude of doing the Charleston for me. It only evokes the attitude of watching someone do the Charleston. So that these attitudes are things we say that can't ever be really described. Unless, and the only way to communicate anything about them and to know that we're communicating about the same thing is if we have some kind of shared experience. So that all goes very well with the stuff that she's saying, and I'm super impressed because I don't know, maybe she's just smarter than me, maybe, but a lot of what she's saying took me a lot longer to figure out, and she seems to have figured it out a lot younger in life. So maybe it has to do with the challenges of being trans in our society, or I don't know, or it could be just something about women in general. I think that they're a little bit stronger than men earlier on in their lives. Anyway,
there is the measurement, and then there is the mechanical process that gives rise to all of that. Each of these are one level further removed from your experience. So we have the sensory experience, which is the most sort of honest experience in the process. Then we have the sort of measurement, the optical or acoustic frameworks. And then we have the mechanical frameworks. So you can see these are very...
I'm not following here. These are... The one's not more honest than the other. I don't understand how she's equating these. So I would say some kind of false equivalence. I don't know.
Subtle distinctions, but they make a really big impact once you're aware of this. Oftentimes students are sitting around trying to think about controlling parts inside their body, but that's not really the way you learn to control your body.
I don't know if I'm supposed to mark this true or not. I'm going to give it one untrue and one true. Because we're back to the pants here. And oddly we're getting into binary thinking. Really binary thinking. So I think you can just switch between these ways of considering something. And I think the experience of, for instance, focusing on something internal, focusing somewhere else, even getting some information about what actually happened internally, and then coming back to the sensation, can have some learning effect, and then I think also some training effect. I'm not saying that I have studies to show you that, but I have the personal experience that the more I trained in singing, the more I developed my proprioception and sensitivity around those coordinations that I rely on the most, but not universally. So not, for instance, if I'm messing around with my friends who sing more pop music and stuff, I don't have any kind of advantage as far as proprioception from the stuff that I'm doing with opera, because it's so far removed. And I'm not developing extra sensitivity and coordination with the relevant body parts in the relevant configurations. So yeah, I would say that's a very specific thing.
We learn to control our voice through listening and attempting to create what we heard.
That's I'm reading Manuel Garcia, and he makes this point. I'm reading that for the audience, kind of word for word in one of my live series, and Garcia makes this point that you learn chiefly by imitation. And yes, I think it's true, but it's untrue that the other things she included didn't play an important role in the results that she got, and that they wouldn't equally play an important role and the same role for somebody else. I think it's maybe kind of infantilizing the voice student a little bit. And maybe that's a little bit dangerous to me. It's something that you would want to avoid.
That's how you did it as a baby, so why would you try to fight that? And
so, that actually, first bullshit. There's her first bullshit, because this is the old baby thing, and boy, do I hate this trope. The idea that because you did things a certain way as a baby, those are necessarily the way that you'd want to do it now. Especially considering, what babies are able to learn and how quickly and everything like that. Yeah, it's super impressive, but you're not a baby anymore. So if you've developed, and for instance, like as a baby, you cannot lower your larynx. You can't. Unless you're having a heart issue, I think. Something like that. It's a sign when you see a baby's larynx getting pulled down, you have to call the doctor, because it's a sign of respiratory distress, because they don't have the hyoid bone fused down and ready to go to lower the larynx. So they're not able to lower their larynx, and they wouldn't actually be able to speak, even if you took the brain of an adult and you put it into a baby and you kind of wired everything so that they know how to speak and they have the experience of speaking. There's a lot that they wouldn't be able to do. We evolved this hyoid bone, and it's a big part of why we can speak. And it's not ready to go when you're born, actually. Babies are also, in terms of education and development, like in a completely different place. So back to the pants analogy. Just because wearing, now we're not in the pants anymore, but just because wearing a onesie was a good idea when you were a baby and your parents dressed you in this baby clothing, doesn't mean it's a good idea now. So the training methods that apply to a baby don't necessarily apply to adults. It's a terrible trope. It's in like Alexander technique and a bunch of other completely useless methods. So I hope she drops that.
Do it a different way now. You already have all the fundamental skills in place when you were 2 years old.
Like I said, you didn't. Well, I don't know what the age is for everything. For development of speech. But as a child, it's a lot easier to do the things that she's talking about. I mean, your vocal tract is a lot smaller as a child, so nobody's a bass when they're a child, or a baritone or whatever. Nobody's worried about feminizing their voice as a child, and they also haven't gone through, for instance, if they're assigned male at birth, they haven't gone through puberty yet, so they're not dealing with the same problems. So it's kind of not very smart to say that because babies only use imitation, it's a good idea for you to only use imitation. I've also read, by the way, and I don't have this ready to go, that before they're imitating sounds, babies are mimicking the tongue movements of people that they hear speaking silently inside their mouth. And that actually would imply that she's dead wrong about how babies learn in the first place. So if that's happening first, then actually the babies are going the biomechanical route first. They're developing the range of motion, and they're teaching their tongue to be able to do the basic gestures. And then when all of that's ready to go, they're able to move on like she did. And just, listen and react.
To learn how to modify your voice, you just have to play into those strengths. Understanding what description is being.
So, what strengths is the thing? The question is what strengths? And that's a specific question it's going to have different answers for every specific person. So for instance, if I were just looking at her from the outside, and I haven't heard her speak yet, but I would add, okay, let's say I'm allowed to watch her speak, but I can't hear the sound. And I'm given the information that she's trans because she's passing so well that I wouldn't even ask the question in the first place, like, is she trans? Just seems like a young woman. So you'd have to tell me that she's trans, and I also wouldn't know from listening to her. I only know that she's trans because she's on this channel talking about this stuff and saying that she's trans. If you didn't tell me that and you allowed me to watch just the video, and you did tell me that she's trans, so I'm allowed to watch the video. Sorry, you told me that she's trans. I could predict that she's probably doing pretty well with her voice feminization. And my reason for that would be that she has a short upper lip. And I would put that in the top category of physical features that I look at that help me predict what a person's voice is going to sound like, is the geometry of the upper lip. When the upper lip is short, there's a much higher chance that they're going to sound like a stereotypical young woman. And we could even say more a stereotypical pretty young woman, which is how she's presenting. I'm not saying that she's stereotypical as far as her personality or anything like that, but she seems like a pretty young woman in every sort of traditional binary sense. And that's something that I associate visually with a short upper lip, but because of what I know about acoustics, I know that I'm actually associating that acoustically as well, that I'm hearing something that's due to the upper lip being shorter. In new school singing, that's area of interest number 2. And changing area of interest number 2 already, when you reduce it, is changing all resonant frequencies of the voice. So reducing the terminal opening, it's the end of the vocal tract, lowers everything, and opening it raises everything. But making those changes also has an effect on area of interest number 1. That's the total length that she was talking about before and calling size, which we have to correct and call length. Those are cues to me that I'm going to hear a feminine voice. They also happen to be as far as the short upper lip goes, that's one of the things that's most commonly done when there's surgery on the face, plastic surgery on the face. I looked this up when Caitlyn Jenner did her transition, and I watched an interview with a plastic surgeon, and he explained that the short upper lip is a sign of youth and this sort of female presentation. And right away I thought, well, yeah, and that makes a sound as well. So what it's doing is shortening the overall length a little bit, and then it's also allowing for simultaneously lowering of all the vocal tract resonances while keeping it short. So if your upper lip is longer, when you reduce the size of the mouth opening, you wind up also lengthening. Or you tend to wind up also lengthening. And then we'll take a look later, because I'll try to do some of her exercises. So.
Used and understanding what description you are meaning to use can really help you communicate more clearly about voice. It can help you understand voice resources a lot better, and it can keep you from making a really common mistake that beginners make, which is focus.
And that's also why I hope, if this gets back to her, that she's not mad at me, because I think this is in the spirit of what she's after. And what she seems to be after to me is the truth. So if I'm making mistakes here and we correct it, that's great, because I'll be closer to finding out the truth. I'll be a little bit more confident about what I know. Maybe I'll make some corrections, and I love that. And I hope that she's also will be receiving this in the same spirit. All I can do is try to offer this in the best spirit possible. And then I can also hide behind the viewer who requested this video. So it was not my fault.
Focusing too much on the biomechanics or the acoustics of the process without having enough of that supportive listening and subjective experience backing it. Don't get me wrong, the acoustics...
I mean, now she's talking more reasonably, though. So now she's talking about not having enough of something. And that's in complete agreement with where I'm coming from here, which is that having shorts ready to go for the summer is not the same as shorts being the only pants that matter. Not that shorts are pants. The only bottoms? I don't know. Whatever.
The biomechanics are definitely useful. That's why I fell in love with them for many years.
Biomechanics and acoustics, let's just say, because nobody can fault me when I'm saying she's contradicted herself, but they are useful. So there's no reason to discourage people from biomechanics and acoustics. And I should mention, that's like a lot of her videos, so it's worth... I mean, it's good for her if you watch the videos.
However, when you are trying to learn, acoustics and biomechanics are more abstract.
So you should wait until after you learned? I mean, okay, this gets an untrue, because whether something is abstract or not doesn't depend on how far you are in your learning process. I think that's simple enough.
They're further away from the directness of the topic.
I have to disagree. These things are not further away or closer to the directness of the topic. That seems like just a little bit of a tortured construction. You could speak directly or not about these things. Yeah.
And for that reason, they act like meta information. It's meta knowledge. You can use knowledge of acoustics and biomechanics to come up with new sounds, but the natural process for most voice learners is the opposite. By playing with the sounds, you gain awareness of the biomechanics, or
I mean, I guess untrue. So if we look at the statement, direct action and experience is the true teacher, what does it mean? It's the true teacher. And what about are the other teachers untrue teachers? So biomechanics and acoustics are the untrue teachers? Or, I don't get it. I don't understand this construct. Sorry. I think it's all kind of a confused way to say that she's into shorts right now.
Vice versa. We can always think in the subjective auditory lens. We can think in the acoustic lens. We can think in the biomechanical lens. We could even think in the behavioral lens, and probably more.
I would caution that her take on the sensory lens is maybe a little bit simplistic. That the sensory lens doesn't need to be whatever. Everything is relative. There's no up or down. Because, for instance, up or down is a sensory experience. And just because you want the sensory experience to be simple doesn't mean that it is. And just because you can kind of filter your memories about it in a way that simplifies it, or use a narrative to wrap everything up in a way that looks neat, when you dig into sensory experience, for instance, when I learned about metal, there was a day in my life when I did not know what metal is in the sound. And then there was a moment where I learned, and an interesting thing happened. All of the listening experiences I had from before that were kind of updated. I didn't not have the experience of hearing metal before I learned what the word was. But I didn't have access to that in my thoughts, because I didn't have a word for it or a concept for it. So I wasn't able to ask questions like, do I enjoy more or less metal in the sound when I have been listening to operatic tenors? Or do I like a range of sounds or whatever? So that this sensory part can be influenced by objective reality and by measurement. And it's changeable. And also can be quite specific, and it also can be quite general, and things in between. So I think that's so I think that's that.
But those three that we talked about today are the main lenses that I encourage you to keep in mind when you're exploring voice resources, and it may keep you out of trouble and keep these things a little more clear from one another.
I mean, I could suggest some more lenses, but they would have to do with the stuff that I do, the jobs that I do. But I could suggest, when someone gives you a vocal technique, break it down in terms of position, motion, and attitude, and you can find out what those are in things I've already published. If you're looking at your overall development, you can look at things in terms of fitness, knowledge, or your psychological health or your heart, spiritual or psychological fitness. And so on and so forth. I have different kits of lenses that are useful. And what's most useful about them isn't necessarily that they lead you to the truth. It's about establishing a pattern of practice that I think she's demonstrating. So that's really important thing to say here, is that I think she's demonstrating a good way to be, even if I'm not agreeing with everything that she's saying.
So I hope this helps. I know it can be confusing with all the terminology and different language, but this should hopefully simplify it for you. If you're a beginner or intermediate person, you should pretty much be thinking on that subjective sensory experience lens.
Nah, I gotta say no. Do it just the way she did. Start exploring resources. If something seems interesting to you, think of that like the weather. If acoustics seems interesting to you right now, trust it. It's the fall, and, some medium thickness pair of pants is a good idea. If you're interested in biomechanics, go for it. If you're interested in psychology right now, go for it. Try to keep in mind that because all of these are the lenses that are looking at the same thing, you can see the whole thing from each lens. So it's easy to forget about the other lenses, and it's easy to decide that the other lenses are not important, and it's easy to keep feeling that way even when it's no longer reasonable to feel that way. So that if you want to avoid going around and round in circles for longer than you wanted to, it's a good idea to make a plan to switch between lenses like the ones that she's recommending.
Which is why you should be training your ear and trying to take action with your voice, finding sounds you like, trying to imitate sounds that you like. All those things are naturally going to make you better at voice.
That's 100% true. Like, all of these things will naturally make you better at voice. Again, though, not a reason not to get interested in biomechanics and acoustics.
And then, of course, if you have an interest in voice and how it works, then definitely learn the acoustics of it.
Okay,
definitely
it's like,
learn.
Okay, this is the problem. I should watch these things and take notes before it would take away the freshness of the reaction, right? But she's making the exact same point. I will point out that it's in contradiction with her main point, and that she's discouraging you from getting interested in these things. So why? I just want to know why. Why? I don't know. I get it. You're over with pants. It's the summer where you are. Shorts are awesome right now, but it's not the same weather everywhere.
Learn the biomechanics of it. It's really fascinating. It's beautiful stuff. But if you're just a vocalist, you just need to listen and do.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, if you're a vocalist, I'm gonna put. She gets two bullshits, but it's really the same bullshit as before. If you're a vocalist with an acoustic problem, you're not going to solve that problem by listening and imitating, if you haven't already. If you've been listening and imitating and it's not getting the progress that you were hoping for, there's no reason to keep going around in circles with that. There's also no reason to start thinking that therefore imitating sounds and working intuitively is a waste of time. Both of those are stupid conclusions. Make a plan to switch, is what I would say. And so now I saved the really controversial part for the end of this, I guess. Because I'm gonna be looking at a point that Zhea's known for making, which is the reason that the viewer asked me to look at this. And her point has to do with voice surgery and whether or not it's a good idea to get voice surgery, you know, if it's necessary, etc. Oh, let's see, where did...
So yeah, that's all for this video. I hope you found it helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Second here.
Enjoy the content on this channel. Don't forget to check us out on Patreon if you'd like to support the work we do here on this channel. If you'd like to work together and...
Okay.
I'm wondering if Z here has had the voice feminization surgery herself or
So
not.
she's known for this. Oh, where did the other one go? Sorry, guys. I got some... Fix this. I'm gonna fix this in 2 seconds, guys. Just 1 second.
I'm wondering if Z here has had the voice feminization surgery herself
So I'm gonna
or
play
not.
side by side.
Vocal change surgery.
Hi, where did you get your surgery at? Are you sure you didn't get vocal cord surgery?
Okay.
Greetings.
I don't know.
I had vocal surgery.
So here we have on the left.
Today, I
Sorry
wanna make
for
a
the sound
video
being
need vocal
talking
surgery
about the
to
philosophy
crazy
of
here.
trans
Your
voice,
speaking
okay?
Say, I'll
voice.
just
So
turn it
I feel
down.
there are a lot of resources out there, some good, some bad.
So we've got
Very little
on the
about
left
why. Why are we doing this? I mean, besides the fact that
her video talking about whether or not you need vocal surgery for voice feminization, whether it's a good idea or whether or not it's better to rely on training. And again, she has really good balanced points, so she's not extreme on this or anything like that. But she makes the point that she didn't have vocal surgery, and she shows that she was trolled for that. People claiming that she did have vocal surgery because her results are so good, and she passes so well. And that's whether or not you can see her. If you're just listening, she sounds like a woman. I mean, she is a woman, but she presents 100% in the traditional way we would think of a young, pretty woman her age. So, and I very much believe her that she hasn't had surgery on her vocal folds. But I am not sure that we can say she hasn't had vocal surgery. I don't know what her medical history is, but it's apparent from comparing these two images of her face, and then also listening to the sound and watching her as she articulates during speech. It appears to me that she had surgery on her face for feminization, which is a thing that people do, and she's got a very balanced approach to also the voice surgery, and that's cool. But she emphasizes the learning part, and that's also cool. But I'm not sure I agree that shortening the upper lip, and I don't see how she could have such a change in her upper lip without the surgery, especially since as people age, the upper lip gets longer. I don't see how that could be done without surgery. And if that's the case, then it's kind of bullshit to be telling people all you have to do is practice the stuff I tell you. If she's had surgery, if she's had surgery that has a big effect on the sound. Now, if I pull back my lip, although it's harder to talk, and it's really because I need to contort myself to get into this position, because my upper lip is so long. But if I just have it out here, and even if I'm speaking at the same pitch, or if I just have it here and I'm speaking at the same pitch, it's a really different effect from if it's back here. Now, obviously you can't walk around like this, and that would be a problem. So, but if even with the pitch up, when my vocal tract is longer because of the upper lip, it changes the way so I can raise the pitch. It still doesn't make the change in quality that I get if I keep that upper lip back. But unfortunately, because of the muscles I have to use to do that, considering the length of my upper lip, it really limits the rest of my options in the vocal tract. So if someone came to me and they said, I want to feminize my voice, where do I start? I might say, send me a picture of your face. And I mean, yeah, I would say definitely go see this girl, Zhea. She really knows her stuff, and she got great results. But then I might also say, when she tells you that it's everything to do with technique and nothing to do with any kinds of alteration, I would say that that's putting the biomechanical and acoustic part kind of behind you and forgetting how much you invested in solving that problem. And it doesn't matter if your speech therapist knows about it or what. You can definitely use direct experience, like she was talking about, to test whether or not having the vocal tract shorter from the up, it's hard to do. Shorter from the up, it's hard to do. Shorter from, I get tired trying to do it. But anyway, whether or not having the vocal tract shorter from the upper lip is actually going to aid in feminizing the sound, I would say yes. And then I would say that if she got surgery that shortened her upper lip, that's an important part of the recipe that gives her this final result. It's biomechanical and acoustic. I would say it's anatomical, biomechanical, and acoustic. And there's more than just those lenses. But I would say it's rather significant. So that's me stepping in whatever there. Thanks for watching. Let's see if anyone stopped in. Oh yes, yeah, I got Oleg, sorry, my Russian, Grigoryevich. Oleg Grigoryevich wanted me to say something in a female voice. So I've watched a couple of videos, and what I learned about was especially that I have to try to keep the vocal tract short, and well, they say the space very small. Now I'm not very good at this. Sorry. It's a really skilled thing, I think, but the space really small. And I suppose also some sibilance in the S's is going to help a lot. But that's a little bit exaggerated. I have to find, the real happy medium for feminizing my voice. But again, I would say that having this shorter would be a really, really big help. Yeah. So, anyway, that's my attempt at feminization. I do some better examples when I'm just messing around and I'm able to do things more like what she says. And I'm not just trying to get a result right away. So, let's see. If constricting the throat. So for Pablo, yes, constricting the throat, the throat's a big place, but constricting area of interest number 3 is going to have, it's going to have the same influence on the first formant and the second formant. It raises all resonances of the vocal tract. And the same is true for AOI number 2, for area of interest number 2. They have opposite effects. So if you constrict area of interest number 3, that's going to raise everything. And if you constrict area of interest number 2, that's going to lower everything. And vice versa. But no, they raise all resonances equally. Yeah. It's AOI, areas of interest number 4 and 5 are where you're going to be separating, shall we say, your second formant from your first formant. Oh, hi Sam. Yeah, I mean the other thing is I really have to relax and not try to prove so much. And then psychologically, also, like, I'm a cisgender guy with a beard who's talking about voice feminization on a live stream. And so there's like a million psychological reasons it would be really hard. But I've also seen a couple of voice feminization examples, and when they have a longer lip, they do tend to use more of this cheek flexing. Oh, hi, Pablo. Yeah, so yes, there's a huge difference between shortening the vocal tract and constricting area of interest number 3. There's a similarity in the sense that both of them raise all the resonances of the vocal tract. But when you shorten the area of interest number 1, which is shortening the vocal tract, you're not changing the resonances of the voice because of a perturbation in the width of the tube. You're literally changing the length of the tube. So you're changing the fundamental frequency that would fit in the tube if that tube were just a smooth, uniform tube. You're changing, let's say, if it was an organ pipe, you're changing what pitch it would play. When you do that, because where the other areas of interest are is determined by where the displacement nodes and antinodes are, and that's a measurement that comes from the wavelength of the fundamental, and then you multiply to get the further let's say the divisions of that wave. Because you're doing that way, then changing where area of the length of area of interest number 1 is also changing the location of areas of interest number 4 and number 5 relative to the others. So yeah, if you're lengthening the end of the mouth, obviously, like if you're sticking your lips out, then you've pushed area of interest number 2 further away from, let's say, your skull. And if you lower your larynx, you've moved area of interest number 3, like you're literally moving area of interest number 3. And if you shorten your neck, you might have brought area of interest number 2 closer to area of interest number 3, and so you made the tube shorter in that way. But yeah, they have really different effects. There's also other like non-fungible effects, things that you can't exchange between different areas of interest. So as far as the resonant frequencies goes, there's all of this similarity. But area of interest number 3, for instance, that's the only place that is gonna cause a change of vocal mode if you constrict it and then have enough pressure plus enough resistance from the vocal. Well, you can't have pressure without resistance, really. So area of interest number 3 is the only one that can give you metal in the sound. You can't get that from any of the others. And it's also the only area of interest where if you narrow it, you're coupling the impedance between the vocal folds and the vocal tract, the air in the vocal tract. So normally the vocal folds are like really heavy and big, and it's like your hand trying to move air. It's difficult. So, but you put this constriction in, and now the impedance is kind of, it's raised or lowered, sorry, coming out the other end. You're going from high impedance to lower impedance, and this funnel shape is helping you to get the transfer of energy between the vocal folds and the vocal tract. And then area of interest number 2 also can't be replaced because that's the only place where you can transfer energy into the air around you. Well, I guess your nose as well. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess that's it, guys. Thanks for the questions. If you have any requests for the next episode, or for whatever kind of live stream you'd like to see about singing, let me know. But yeah, so that's it for now. I'm going to do my little closing screen here. Oh, that didn't work.